dragi tovarăși și prieteni.
Nicolae Ceausescu, born 26 January 1918 in Scornicești, County of Olt, Romania, deceased on 25 December 1989 in Târgoviște, County of Dâmbovița, Romania, was a Romanian communist politician and statesman. He was the General Secretary of the Romanian Communist Party from 1965 to 1989, and the second and last communist leader of Romania. He was also the country's head of state from 1967 to 1989, and widely classified as a dictator, serving as President of the State Council and from 1974 concurrently as President of the Republic, until his overthrow and execution in the Romanian Revolution in December 1989, part of a series of anti-communist uprisings in Eastern Europe that year. Born in 1918 in Scornicești, Ceausescu was a member of the Romanian Communist Youth Movement. He was arrested in 1939 and sentenced for conspiracy against social order, spending the time during the war in prisons and internment camps. Jilava Prison, 1940, Caranspes, 1942, Vacaresti, 1943, and Târgu Jiu, 1943. Ceausescu rose up through the ranks of Gheorghe Gheorghiu Deja's socialist government and, upon Gheorghiu Deja's death in 1965, he succeeded to the leadership of the Romanian Communist Party as General Secretary. Based on his birth certificate, he was born on 5 February 1918, rather than the official 8 February 1918. His birth was registered with a 3-day delay, which later led to confusion. According to the information recorded in his autobiography, Nicolae Ceausescu was born on 26 January 1918. He studied at the village school until the age of 11, when he left to Bucharest. The Old County Service of National Archives holds excerpts from the catalogues of Scornicești Primary School, which certifies that Nicolae Ceausescu passed the first grade with an average of 8.26 and the second grade with an average of 8.18, ranking third, in a class in which 25 students were enrolled. He became an apprentice shoemaker, working in the workshop of Alexandru Sangelescu, a shoemaker who was an active member in the then illegal Communist Party. Ceausescu was soon involved in the Communist Party activities, becoming a member in early 1932, but as a teenager he was given only small tasks. He was first arrested in 1933, at the age of 15, for street fighting during a strike, and again, in 1934, first for collecting signatures on a petition protesting against the trial of railway workers, and twice more for other similar activities. By the mid-1930s, he had been in missions in Bucharest, Craiova, Câmpulung, and Râmnicu Vâlcea, being arrested several times. The profile file from the secret police named him a dangerous communist agitator and distributor of communist and anti-fascist propaganda materials. For these charges, he was convicted on 6 June 1936 by the Brașov Tribunal to 2 years in prison, an additional 6 months for contempt of court, and 1 year of forced residence in Scornicești. He spent most of his sentence in Doftana prison. While out of jail in 1939, he met Elena Petrescu, whom he married in 1946 and who would play an increasing role in his political life over the years. After the communists seized power in Romania in 1947, and under the patronage of Gheorghiu Dej, Ceausescu was elected a member of the Great National Assembly, the new legislative body of Communist Romania. In May 1948, Ceausescu was appointed Secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture, and in March 1949 he was promoted to the position of Deputy Minister. From the Ministry of Agriculture, and with no military experience, he was made Deputy Minister in charge of the armed forces, holding the rank of Major General. Later, promoted to the rank of Lieutenant General, he became First Deputy to the Ministry of Defense and head of the Army's Higher Political Directorate. Ceausescu studied at the Soviet Frunze Military Academy in Moscow for 2 consecutive months in both 1951 and 1952. In 1952, Gheorghiu Dej brought him onto the Central Committee months after the party's Muscovite faction led by Anna Pauker had been purged. In the late 1940s, early 1950s, the party had been divided into the Home Communists headed by Gheorghiu Dej, who remained inside Romania prior to 1944, and the Muscovites who had gone into exile in the Soviet Union. With the partial exception of Poland, where the Polish October crisis of 1956 brought to power the previously imprisoned Home Communist Władysław Gomułka, Romania was the only Eastern European nation where the Home Communists triumphed over the Muscovites. In the rest of the Soviet bloc, there were a series of purges in this period that led to the Home Communists being executed or imprisoned. Like his patron Gheorghiu Dej, Ceausescu was a Home Communist who benefited from the fall of the Muscovites in 1952. In 1954, Ceausescu became a full member of the Politburo, effectively granting him one of the highest positio. When Gheorghiu Dej died on 19 March 1965, Ceausescu was not the obvious successor, despite his closeness to the longtime leader. but widespread infighting by older and more connected officials led the Politburo to choose Ceausescu as a compromise candidate. He was elected General Secretary on 22 March 1965, 3 days after Gheorghiu Deja's death. One of Ceausescu's first acts was to change the name of the party from the Romanian Workers' Party back to the Communist Party of Romania and to declare the country a socialist republic, rather than a people's republic. In 1967, he consolidated his power by becoming president of the State Council, making him de jure head of state. His political apparatus sent many thousands of political opponents to prison or psychiatric hospitals. Initially, Ceausescu became a popular figure, both in Romania and in the West, because of his independent foreign policy, which challenged the authority of the Soviet Union. In the 1960s, he eased press censorship and ended Romania's active participation in the Warsaw Pact, but Romania formally remained a member. He refused to take part in the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia by Warsaw Pact forces and even actively and openly condemned it in his 21 August 1968 speech. He traveled to Prague a week before the invasion to offer moral support to his Czechoslovak counterpart, Alexander Dubček. Although the Soviet Union largely tolerated Ceausescu's recalcitrance, his seeming independence from Moscow earned Romania maverick status within the Eastern Bloc. All of Ceausescu's economic, foreign and demographic policies were meant to achieve his ultimate goal, turning Romania into one of the world's great powers. In October 1966, Ceausescu banned abortion and contraception in IMP. During the following years, Ceausescu pursued an open policy towards the United States and Western Europe. Romania was the first Warsaw Pact country to recognize West Germany, the first to join the International Monetary Fund, and the first to receive a U.S. President, Richard Nixon. In 1971, Romania became a member of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Romania and Yugoslavia were also the only Eastern European countries that entered into trade agreements with the European Economic Community before the fall of the Eastern Bloc. A series of official visits to Western countries including the United States, France, the United Kingdom, Spain, and Australia helped Ceausescu to present himself as a reforming communist, pursuing an independent foreign policy within the Soviet bloc. He also became eager to be seen as an enlightened international statesman, able to mediate in international conflicts, and to gain international respect for Romania. Ceausescu negotiated in international affairs, such as the opening of U.S. relations with China in 1969 and the visit of Egyptian President Anwar Sadat to Israel in 1977. In addition, Romania was the only country in the world to maintain normal diplomatic relations with both Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization. In 1974, Ceausescu converted his post of president of the State Council to a full-fledged executive presidency. He was first elected to this post in 1974 and would be re-elected every 5 years until 1989. Also, the Socialist Republic of Romania was the first of the Eastern Bloc nations to have official relations with the Western Bloc and the European Community. An agreement including Romania and the Community's generalized system of preferences was signed in 1974 and an agreement on industrial products was signed in 1980. On 4 April 1975, Ceausescu visited Japan and met with Emperor Hirohito. In June 1978, Ceausescu made a state visit to the UK where a £200 million licensing agreement was signed between the Romanian government and British Aerospace for the production of more than 80 BAC-111 aircraft. The deal was said at the time to be the biggest between two countries involving a civil aircraft. This was the first state visit by a communist head of state to the UK, and Ceausescu was given a knighthood by the Queen Elizabeth II, which was revoked on the day before his death in 1989. Similarly, in 1983, Vice President of the United States George H. W. Bush and in 1985 United States Secretary of State George Shultz also praised the Romanian dictator. Ceausescu's political independence from the Soviet Union and his protest against the invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968 drew the interest of Western powers, whose governments briefly believed that he was an anti-Soviet maverick and hoped to create a schism in the Warsaw Pact by funding him. Ceausescu did not realize that the funding was not always favorable. Ceausescu was able to borrow more than $13 billion from the West to finance economic development programs, but these loans ultimately devastated the country's finances. He also secured a deal for cheap oil from Iran, but the deal fell through after the Shah was overthrown. In an attempt to correct this, Ceausescu decided to repay Romania's foreign debts. He organized the 1986 military referendum and managed to change the constitution, adding a clause that barred Romania from taking foreign loans in the future. According to official results, the referendum yielded a nearly unanimous yes vote. Romania's record, having all of its debts to commercial banks paid off in full, has not been matched by any other heavily indebted country in the world. The policy to repay, and, in multiple cases, prepay, Romania's external debt became the dominant policy in the late 1980s. The result was economic stagnation throughout the 1980s and, towards the end of the decade, an economic crisis. The country's industrial capacity was eroded as equipment grew obsolete and energy intensity increased, and the standard of living deteriorated significantly. Draconian restrictions were imposed on the household energy use to ensure adequate supplies for industry. Convertible currency exports were promoted at all costs and imports severely reduced. In 1988, real GDP contracted by 0.5%, mostly due to a decline in industrial output caused by significantly increased material costs. Despite the 1988 decline, the net foreign balance reached its decade-long peak to 9.5% of GDP. In 1989, GDP slumped by a further 5.8% due to growing shortages and the increasingly obsolete capital stock. By March 1989, virtually all external debt had been repaid, including all medium and long-term external debt. The remaining amount, totaling less than $1 million, consisted of short-term credits, mainly short-term export credits granted by Romania. A 1989 decree legally prohibited Romanian entities from contracting external debt. The CIA World Factbook edition of 1990 listed Romania's external debt as none as of mid-1989. In November 1989, the 14th Congress of the Romanian Communist Party saw Ceausescu, then aged 71, re-elected for another 5 years as leader of the PCR. During the Congress, Ceausescu made a speech denouncing the anti-communist revolutions happening throughout the rest of Eastern Europe. The following month, Ceausescu's government itself collapsed after a series of violent events in Timisoara and Bucharest. Ceausescu and his wife Elena fled the capital with Emil Babu and Mania Minescu and flew by helicopter to Ceausescu's Snagov residence, from which they fled again, this time to Târgoviște. They abandoned the helicopter near Târgoviște, having been ordered to land by the army, which by that time had restricted flying in Romania's airspace. The Ceausescus were held by the police while the policemen listened to the radio. They were eventually handed over to the army. On Christmas Day, 25th December 1989, the Ceausescus were tried before a court convened in a small room on orders of the National Salvation Front, Romania's provisional government. They faced charges including illegal gathering of wealth and genocide. Ceausescu repeatedly denied the court's authority to try him, and asserted he was still legally the president of Romania. At the end of the trial, the Ceausescus were found guilty and sentenced to death. A soldier standing guard in the proceedings was ordered to take the Ceausescus outside one by one and shoot them, but the Ceausescus demanded to die together. The soldiers agreed to this and began to tie their hands behind their backs, which the Ceausescus protested against, but were powerless to prevent. The Ceausescus were executed by a group of soldiers, Captain Ionel Boru, Sergeant Major Jorgen Octavian and Doran Marian Serlin, and 5 other non-commissioned officers who were recruited from 20 volunteers. Before his sentence was carried out, Nicolae Ceausescu sang the International whilst being led towards the wall. The firing squad began shooting as soon as the two were in their positions up against the wall. Later that day, the execution was also shown on Romanian television. The hasty show trial and the images of the dead Ceausescus were videotaped and the footage released in numerous Western countries 2 days after the execution. The Ceausescus were the last people to be executed in Romania before the abolition of capital punishment on 7th of January 1990.